Welcome to Global Voices, where every story matters. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Global Voices, the podcast where readers and writers share their love and passion for books. My name is Teuta Metra, and this is a new episode of Writing Beyond Borders. Today, I'll be chatting to Iris van Ooyen. Iris, thank you so much for being here today. I'm so thrilled to have you here.
Thank you for inviting me. So good to see you again.
Yes, it's so nice to see you again too. Okay, to start, I would like you to tell us something about yourself and your journey as a writer.
So I'm from the south of the Netherlands, born and raised here. And I started writing my first book, which is a novel, a young adult fantasy novel. It came out in 2018. I started writing it about 3 years before that. And later on, I also wrote nonfiction book, which is much more related to the work that I do as a life navigation mentor. So two
Okay.
quite different
Yes,
types of
let's
books.
stay a little bit at your first book. It took you 3 years to write it?
Yes. Well, not full time because I mean I have my own business,
Yes.
so I gotta work. And writing a novel, it was the idea came to me. It was really interesting. I can still remember the moment. I was in bed. I was almost asleep, and there's like these three short lines that came to mind, and I thought, oh, I have to get up. I have to write them down, or I'll forget them. So I went to the living room and I grabbed an envelope. So I wrote it on the back of the envelope, and then I saw it again in the next morning. I thought, this could be a book. A few weeks after that initial envelope thing, I was inspired to write the first chapter. I didn't really think about it. It just kind of flowed out of me. Um, and then it took for like almost a year for me to decide I'm going to write this book.
This
I'm not
book.
going to write it someday, but I'm going to start writing today.
Okay. And was it those three sentences that came in your mind? Was it the beginning or the ending of the book? Because when I write, I always see the ending of the book, but I don't know how I'm going to start and how I'm going to that end. How is this in your case?
So for me, it was more about the premise of the book.
Okay.
Um, the lines aren't even in there, except for like when I talk about in the end, like the dedication of the book. I was like, this is how it got started. They might end up in the third book because it's a trilogy,
Okay.
but it was just because of those three lines, I knew exactly what it meant, and it gave me like the inspiration to get started. And for me, I immediately knew it's a trilogy. I knew like really roughly what would happen in each book. And then it's a surprise for me to discover like how is it going to unfold? Like how are they going to get to that point?
Okay. And it was a young adult. Why a
Yes.
young adult? And another question is, you write also in English. Why in English and not in Dutch?
So maybe start with that last question. I write in English because I find it easy. I do a lot of work in English. So I have a very international client base, so I'm really used to speaking a lot of English. And I write my newsletter, my articles in English. So when I sat down, so the first those three sentences they just came to me in
In
English,
English.
maybe because I speak English so often. And then also that first chapter, it just kind of flowed out of me in English, and I didn't really even think about it. That's just the way it was, and I find it easy to write in English, and to me, it also made a lot of sense when people started asking me questions like, "Why aren't you writing in Dutch?" And I was like, well, first of all, this is just how it came out. I didn't really think about it, but also, why not? Because there's a much larger audience reading English than Dutch.
And about young adult, why young adult?
I didn't really want to write young adult. I wrote the story the way it happened. It was clearly a fantasy, and then actually my editor told me what you've written is really a coming of age story, and it really is a young adult. And I kind of pushed back on that a little bit. I
Okay.
was like, I don't know. Do I want to be writing young adult? And she's like, this is where the book fits. And I'm like, okay, so it is what it is. And then later I came to embrace the fact that that's what it was. And I hadn't realized this is a really large genre, which is quite popular. So
Yes,
it wasn't intentional.
it is quite a competition out there about
Yes.
adults.
Yes.
Yes, and then you wrote another book which has nothing to do with young adults. Is Radiant, if I'm not
Yes.
mistaken. And this is, let me find, focus on energy and balance.
Yes. It's radiant how to have all the energy you need to live a life you love. And it really was like a natural result of the work that I do. As a life navigation mentor, I help people navigate through obstacles. I often support people who don't have a lot of energy. And I was burned out myself at a quite young age. It taught me a lot, and it also gave me a lot of the insights that are in the book. So there's a lot of personal stories in there and tips and tools that I've developed over the years, first for myself, and that I've been supporting clients with them. So it just got to the point, I started writing this book in September 2020. It had been on the back of my mind for a while when I thought like I need to like write this book. I need to bundle my insights and my tools because I think a lot of people can benefit from this. And then at some point it was because it was 2020 and like for everyone, of course, in the middle of the pandemic, there was more time at home. There were no things that you could go to. So I was like, this really feels like it is the moment to start writing that. So
How long did it take to write Radiant?
about a year and a half from the moment I started to when it was launched.
Okay, and I see the book, it's behind you. Can you just show us? I love the cover of that one.
So this is Radiant.
Yes. And this is the Poisoned Arrow. I have read it. Do you like to read us something from the Radiant or Poisoned Arrow? Which one you want?
I picked a short piece from Radiant.
Okay.
So this is from chapter 2, which is about signs revealing you need to manage your energy. I hung up the phone and sat back on the edge of the bed. My parents had just spent the better half of the conversation trying to convince me I had to be careful and slow down, telling me I was doing too much. I had to be careful because they said I was treading in dangerous territory. I disagreed. I was doing fine. Honestly, I was a little annoyed. They kept nagging me. It wasn't the first time they had raised this topic. 2 weeks later, it turned out they were right. While having tea with my dear friend, a nurse, she told me straight up, "You're suffering from burnout." I still wasn't convinced. She suggested I make a list of all the physical symptoms I was experiencing and that she would come back after half an hour. Turns out I filled an entire page with things ranging from dizziness and headaches to being nauseous. Confronting that list, I realized this was not normal, that something might be off after all.
I need to read that book. So I'm gonna check out. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, okay. Let's go back to our journey of process of writing. We as a writer, every one of us has those difficulties when it comes to writing. Um, what about you? What do you find the most difficult when it comes to writing?
So for me, I think two things stand out when I think about that. One is I really hate rewriting, especially a scene. So when I first wrote Poison Arrow, I wrote the whole first draft and then consulted an editor. And then as we were working on the book, my writing obviously improved. And then there was like the initial scenes that I had first written. I could see a difference in like how I was writing now, like 3 years later, and then the initial things I had written. So I needed to change those, and I hated that because the information was all there. I just needed to improve the writing. So the only way to do that was to rewrite the whole scene. You can't just tweak the sentences, and
Yes,
that just doesn't work.
I just did it. So I know the
I
feeling.
tried.
I know the feeling.
Yes. So that's really not something I enjoy. And I think the other part is really getting started.
Yes.
Once you're in the flow of the book, and it's easy, but really getting to the place where you've created enough space in your calendar where you can put in enough time to dive into the book and kind of stay in the book. I think that's the other part that really is it's
Before
just
before
challenging.
I ask you when do you find time to write, I would like to ask, do you always agree with your editor?
No, but she's often right.
That's the thing.
No, and one of the things that comes to mind when you say that, sometimes she would give like a very specific comment. And I was like, no, that's not true, or you see it wrong, or whatever. And then she's like, okay, so maybe keep this in mind. If someone gives feedback on a piece, they might be wrong about like the how to fix it. But the fact that they are flagging it usually means there is something that you need to look at. And once I kept that in mind, like, okay, so maybe her suggestion for the solution isn't the right thing for me for the story or for the character. Um, but the fact that she's flagging it means something is off.
Yeah.
So let me take that to heart and assume that something is off and then what needs to be fixed. And that makes it much easier to see like, oh, she said go left, but I see like I would go a little like this, and then that's the solution.
It's like the expression they say, kill your darlings. But have you ever had a scene that you really loved that one and your editor said you needed to cut that off?
No, but we killed a character that I was fond of. And she was right. And I thought it was fun, but it was just overcomplicating the story. And it wasn't really clear what I mean, to me, it was kind of clear what the function was, but she's like, the book's going to be better without this
Yes.
person kind to like muddying the waters. It took a while for me to,
To accept
uh,
that?
yeah, yeah.
Okay, yeah, yeah. And when do
Because it is like letting go of someone that you've grown to love.
that you have created it in your mind and
Yeah.
yeah. And when do you write? When is your time? The best moment when you are like creative and that you know that I'm gonna sit down now and I'm gonna write.
Yeah. So for me, right after lunch works really well, provided that I've created this space in my calendar to be able to do that. Um, that, but I think it really is about, it's very personal. Like I know some people are like, oh, I write first thing in the morning at 5 a.m. I mean, I would be terrible at that. Uh, so it's really personal. I think that the trick is finding what works for you. And for me,
Okay.
right after lunch works really well.
Okay. Because for
Yeah.
me, when the kids were little, I used to wake up at 5 in the morning and write before they wake up. And then, but now I can write when they go to school. So I have some peace and quiet in my house and I can sit down and I can write something.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
And I think that's the biggest, sorry, no, I was gonna say I think that's the biggest thing, that you can focus on the book
yes.
and you're not going to be distracted because you're gonna go crazy when you keep getting interrupted.
Mhm. And when you start writing the book, if, let's say if it's fiction or nonfiction, do you know, do you have a structure before you write the book or you just start?
Yeah, so I'm not a plotter. I'm more like what they call a pantser. So
Yes.
I write the like, so in my case, I wrote the first chapter. It kind of just poured out of me. And then once I decided to like continue writing the book, I reread the first chapter, and then by the time I was like to the last sentence, I knew what would come next.
Okay.
And that became really my procedure. So I would reread what I'd written the day before, and then by the time I would get to the end of that part, I would know like, okay, this is how it's going to continue.
Now we are almost at the end. I wanted to ask, are you writing something else at the moment?
So I'm working on the sequel of Poisoned Arrow,
Okay.
and it's taking longer than I thought and hoped, which is obviously my own fault because you have to make sure that you
You
have that dedicated time. But I'm like halfway. I have like 60,000 words for the first draft of the part two.
of part two, because I have read part one, so it's coming part two.
Yes, I kind of hoped it would already be done, but yeah, I'm like I feel like I'm halfway with the first draft.
And the last question, do you set a deadline for yourself that, you know what, I have to be done with this draft until, I don't know.
Yeah, I've tried that. It didn't really work. So for the first two books, I didn't really have a deadline. I just started, and then once the first draft was done, I worked with the editor, and then it took however long it took, and to be ready for like to set a date for publication. For the sequel, like I said, Poison Arrow came out, I'm almost ashamed to say it, in 2018, so it feels like forever ago. I mean, I did write Radiant after that, but I don't know. I hope I had hoped it was already done, but sometimes life gets in the way and there's just
Yeah.
other things that take priority. And then the hard part is like finding yourself, I would almost say like fighting your way back into the book to get clear on like exactly what happened in part one, because you need to have not just like the general picture, but as you know, we need to know all these details in
Yes.
order to have everything clear for the rest. So that's my challenge at the moment.
Okay, I'm not keeping you any longer. So you can go and write the book. Thank you so much for being here and having this conversation with me today. Thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me. I really enjoyed it.